be going over the number one game for every Nintendo console release. There will be a few rules to this though. We will not go over systems such as the Game Boy Micro because it plays the same games as the Game Boy Advance and is essentially the same system, just smaller. So this includes the Switch Lite. Also, if a game was released for a new console but also released on the previous gen console, I will not include the number one game on there. You'll see what I mean a little bit later on. Besides that, I hope you guys enjoy the video. Our first console coming in here will be the Color TV game released in 1977. This was actually Nintendo's very first console. The Color TV game was a series of 5 dedicated home video game consoles and released in Japan only. So, this console actually never made it to the US or Europe. Nintendo sold around 3 million units of this console, which was actually pretty impressive for a relatively unknown company back in the late 70s. This is a pretty strange one though because of the lack of games and the time in which the console was released, so I'm going to give the best game on this console to Space Fever, made the same year in 1977. This game was basically a clone of Space Invaders, with a little more color and obviously not in an arcade. So if you ever played Space Invaders and can imagine video games in 1977, it's not hard to see why this was the number one game. But without further ado, on to the next system. Our next console coming in here will be the Game & Watch, released in 1980. The Game & Watch is not something I have actually personally played before, but I have played some of the games from emulators and other such means. This is why I'm giving the number one spot to Donkey Kong Jr., released in 1982. Not only is it a fun game, but it improved on the platform of Donkey Kong, released in 1981. Also, it is only the second game to ever feature our favorite lovable Italian plumber, who is actually the number one game in our next console. Coming up as our next console was the NES, or Nintendo Entertainment System, released in 1983. This is where our favorite Italian plumber comes in. The NES is really what revolutionized home gaming, released almost 40 years ago to this day, and selling a whopping 61.91 million units worldwide. Most of the consoles from here on out probably have the games that you'd expect to be number one, but for the NES I will be choosing Super Mario Bros. 3, released in 1983. It really isn't hard to see why this is the number one game for this console, so we'll be moving to the next console right now. Our next console coming in here will be the Game Boy, released in 1989. Like the NES, the Game Boy is really what revolutionized home gaming, but now portable. This little sucker sold a staggering 118.69 million units. The number one game for this little guy right here is something everybody probably expected: Pokemon Red and Blue, released in 1996. You may be thinking, now, how is this game coming in at number one after almost 10 years after the system was released? And what about your rules? Well, the Game Boy was only discontinued in 2003, so these games are good to go. Our next console coming in is the SNES, released in 1990, or also known as the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Only 7 years after the release of the NES, Nintendo decided to kick it up a notch graphically with the SNES. This little console right here sold 41.9 million units worldwide. There are many amazing games for the SNES, but the one I finally decided on was The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, released in 1992. If you ever played this, it is not hard to see why it is released number one, but also because it started an amazing franchise that is still running strong to this day. Our next console coming up here is something called the Virtual Boy, released in 1995. Given the not well received Virtual Boy, from the terrible controller to the headset that did not work very well, and you only get 22 games released for the entire system before it was discontinued only a year after release. So for this system, I'm going to give the number one spot to Virtual Boy Wario Land, released in the same year of 1995. Yes, every game released for this system started with the words Virtual Boy. Imagine that nowadays. Xbox One, Call of Duty. There isn't too much to say about this game. I mean, it's Wario Land. For what it had to work with, and, being on the Virtual Boy and all, it wasn't a very bad game. But every game on the Virtual Boy had a reddish tinge to it. So, take this list as you will. Now we're getting into the good stuff, guys. The N64, or Nintendo 64, released in 1996, has honestly some of the best games of all time on it. There are so many stellar games for this console, but number one has to be obvious. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, released in 1998, is not only the best game for the N64, but widely regarded as one of the best games of all time. So there doesn't need to be an explanation for why I put it at number 1. Our next console coming in will be the Game Boy Color, released in 1998. The reason this system is on the list, even though you could play Game Boy games on the Game Boy Color, is because the Game Boy Color had its own games that were released that were not compatible to play on the original Game Boy. Got it? Great. Now that's all that's out of the way. For all the Game Boys and DS's, I'm going to spoil it a little bit and say that they're all pretty much just Pokemon games. Like this. Pokemon Silver and Gold came in at number 1, released in 1999 for the Game Boy Color. These games took Pokemon and added vibrant colors and exciting new mechanics. So, I gotta put it at number 1. On to the next console. Our next console coming in is a Nintendo GameCube, released in 2001. Personally, this is my favorite Nintendo system, and I'm not alone, as it sold almost 22 million units from 2001 to 2007. This system took everything from the N64 and just made it better. The controller, the graphics, everything. The game I have chosen for the number 1 spot though on this system is Super Smash Bros. Melee, released in 2001. Honestly, I was gonna choose The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker because I absolutely love that game, but I just had so much fun with Melee growing up and the replayability of it that it had to take my number 1 spot. Our next console coming in here is the Game Boy Advance, or simply known as GBA, released in 2001. This handheld system, released the same year as the GameCube, took the Game Boy and Game Boy Color and put them on steroids. The Game Boy Advance is, well, advanced, it's right in the name, which is why advancing your way through Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, released in 2002, would make you agree with me at putting them for the number 1 spot on this console. These two games, I absolutely love playing them, and they were a huge part of my childhood, and many others that are watching this, I'm sure. Our next system being the Nintendo DS, released in 2004. These games right here were a huge part of my childhood, and I sometimes find myself playing them even to this day. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, released in 2007, take the spot for the number 1 game on the Nintendo DS for me. Diamond and Pearl introduced many more Pokemon and features, as it is the 4th generation of Pokemon games. This game is vibrant, had amazing music, and a great story, and so many hidden little details. By the way, I was always a, personally, Diamond player. That didn't really matter, but thought I'd throw it in there. Don't worry guys, we're almost at the end. Our next console coming in will be the Nintendo Wii, released in 2006. So the game I chose number 1 for the Nintendo Wii might be a little controversial, but I ended up choosing Super Mario Galaxy 2, released in 2010. The reason I have chosen this game is because it's just a better rebuilding of the first Super Mario Galaxy. The only reason I had a hard time with this is because Super Mario Galaxy was the foundation of the sequel, but all around the sequel's just better, so I put it at number 1 over the first one. Our 13th console coming in here will be the Nintendo 3DS, released in 2001. So, as I had said before, for the handheld consoles like the Game Boy and the DS, the number 1 games were basically going to be all Pokemon. That's why I said basically though, because coming out for our number 1 spot for the Nintendo 3DS is Shovel Knight, released in 2014. Shovel Knight is all around just a great game that brings the feel of an older game with modern mechanics and actually tells a great story through its 2D retro style gameplay. This game also reminds me of Castle Crashers, another amazing game and one of my favorite of all time. But maybe that's just because I'm biased. For our 14th console comes the Wii U, released in 2012. So the game Shovel Knight, mentioned on the previous spot, was released for both the Wii U and the 3DS, which is why I chose it as the number 1 game for the 3DS, because Super Mario 3D World, released in 2013, takes my spot for the number 1 game on the Wii U. You might be asking, forget, why the hell is Breath of the Wild not there? Well, I'm glad you asked. Breath of the Wild was released as a launch title for the Switch in 2017, but was made available for the Wii U also. And the Nintendo Switch, released in 2017, coming as our final system, and its number 1 released game is Breath of the Wild. Alright, okay. I'm sure you saw that coming, especially after what I said during the Wii U segment. But it's a clear winner for the Switch that Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is number 1. I mean, come on. It's in talks to be one of the greatest games of all time, just like Ocarina of Time. The only game that could have rivaled this is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but, even that wasn't even close because, it's Breath of the Wild. It's a fantastic game, amazing, and not my favorite Zelda of all time, I must say. But, I mean, it's definitely number 1 for the Switch. There's really no arguing for it. And now that we are out of the way with all of our systems and number one games, I really do hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you want to see other list videos like this. I'll throw them in whenever I get the chance, but I will still be doing mostly gameplay. Anyways, I will see you guys in the next video, and remember, just don't forget about me because, you know, I need the support. But I will see you guys in the next video. Please, have a wonderful day.